I had lived in the same quiet neighborhood for over 12 years, the kind of place where lawns stay neat, mailboxes match, and neighbors wave without really talking. It wasn't perfect, but it was home, the kind of place where rules are taken seriously, thanks to the HOA. If you don't know, HOA stands for Homeowners Association. They make the rules, send the letters, collect the fees. And while they say they're here to keep the community nice and tidy, anyone who's ever dealt with one knows it's more about control than care. My truck was nothing special. A sturdy old F-150 that I used mostly for work. It was a bit worn, out, but reliable. No loud muffler, no broken lights, no obnoxious stickers. Just a plain old pickup. I usually parked it in my driveway, always neatly, never blocking the sidewalk, never in anyone's way. But that didn't stop the HOA from noticing. One Monday morning, I found a bright orange notice on my windshield. Violation, unauthorized vehicle commercial appearance. I remember staring at it confused. Commercial? It wasn't wrapped in logos. It wasn't a company truck. It was mine, no different than any SUV or minivan on the block. I crumpled the notice and tossed it on the passenger seat. I thought it was just a warning. I was wrong. By Friday, I got a letter in the mail, a formal citation, a fine, $250 for a first-time violation. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't done anything wrong. I checked the HOA rulebook, 4 pages of fine print, and found the section they referenced. It said, "Vehicles of commercial design or appearance must be stored out of public view." It was vague. What defines commercial appearance? A toolbox? A ladder? Stickers? My truck had none of that. I called the HOA office and got transferred twice, before speaking to someone who sounded half awake and fully uninterested. "Sir," she said, "if the vehicle gives the impression of being used for business, it may be in violation. You can appeal at next month's meeting." I asked her what impression meant, and she just repeated the sentence like a robot. I hung up frustrated. My wife told me to let it go, pay the fine, park it somewhere else. "Don't stir things up," she said. But it wasn't about the money. It was about principle, about fairness. I wasn't going to be bullied into silence. So, I decided to attend the HOA meeting and make my case. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, ironically built using funds from our HOA dues. The room smelled like bad coffee and dust. Folding chairs, plastic tables, a few bored, members sitting at the front like royalty. Most residents didn't show up, just the usual few, complainers, rule lovers, and me. I raised my hand when they opened the floor for resident concerns. I explained the situation calmly, even brought photos of my truck. I pointed out that it looked no different than my neighbor's SUV, except his had tinted windows and bigger wheels. I asked them to define what they meant by commercial appearance. They couldn't. Then one of the board members, a thin man with glasses too large for his face, said something that stuck with me. Sometimes perception is enough to warrant enforcement. I stood there in silence. Perception, not fact, not violation, just perception. I left that night angrier than I had expected. It wasn't just me they were targeting, it was a system that made people feel powerless. But here's where it gets strange. A week later, I got another letter. Not just another fine. This one was doubled. $500 total. The letter said my vehicle had remained in violation and that continued non-compliance could result in legal action or even towing. I was furious. I decided to dig deeper. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Cars parked overnight on the street, which was technically against the rules. Garbage cans left out for days, boats in driveways. None of those were fined. It seemed random, or maybe not so random. Then, one evening, while walking my dog, I passed the small gated parking lot behind the community office. Something caught my eye. There, in one of the spaces, was a truck that looked nearly identical to mine. Same make, same model, same faded red color. But this one had a dent in the tailgate. something mine didn't have. I leaned in closer. There was a municipal sticker on the windshield, city-owned, and in the driver's seat was a clipboard with some official forms still visible. The next day I went to City Hall. I asked around, posed as someone looking for a vehicle for a local service project. After a bit of harmless small talk, I got the answer I was looking for. That truck belonged to none other than the mayor. I froze. That was the truck I'd seen behind the HOA office, and suddenly a terrible thought hit me. What if they had mistaken his truck for mine? I rushed home and compared my photos to the one I'd taken discreetly of the mayor's truck. The similarities were uncanny, except for the dent. But from a distance, anyone could mix them up. They were practically twins. I looked again at the violation notice. It didn't have a plate number, just red Ford F-150, work style. That could have meant either truck. Could it be? Could the HOA have fined me thinking it was the mayor's truck? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something wasn't right. So I drafted a letter, not just to the HOA, but to the city. I laid out everything: the mistaken identity, the vague rules, the double standards. I included all my evidence. I didn't expect much, but I sent it anyway. Registered mail, signature, required. Days passed. Then I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but I did. It was the mayor. He asked if we could meet, said it was regarding the letter I sent. My palms started to sweat. We agreed to meet at the community clubhouse, neutral ground. When I arrived, he was already there, dressed in a clean suit, no security, no assistants, just him. He thanked me for coming and said he appreciated the respectful tone of my letter. Then, almost laughing, he admitted that the truck in question was indeed his. He used it sometimes when he didn't want to attract attention, said it reminded him of simpler days. Then he paused. He said he had spoken to the HOA board himself, and that what happened to me was, in his words, a classic case of someone doing their job without thinking. He offered to personally clear the fine and make sure no further action would be taken. I should have been relieved, but I wasn't, because I realized something darker. If I hadn't found out, if I hadn't done the digging, if I hadn't spoken up, they would have happily let me pay for someone else's mistake, and that wasn't okay. The following morning, I stepped out of my house and saw something strange. My driveway was completely empty. The mayor's truck, the same truck I had been fined for, was gone. For a split second, I thought maybe it had been stolen. But then, I noticed something on the windshield of my own sedan parked out front. A bright orange notice. Another violation: unauthorized vehicle parked on public curb. I stood there staring at it in disbelief. My personal car now? I hadn't even touched it. They were just stacking violations without reason. I walked to the HOA office furious, ready to demand answers, but the lady at the front desk didn't even look surprised when she saw me. "I'll schedule you for the next board meeting," she said flatly. "You can appeal the fines then." "When is that?" "Next month." A whole month of waiting while the fines kept adding up. I walked out and decided to call the mayor directly. After 3 attempts, he picked up. He sounded groggy, like I had just woken him up. "Yeah," he said. "Mayor, this is Sam. The truck. You parked in my driveway? It got me fined. Then it disappeared." He paused for a long moment. "Oh, yeah," he finally said. "I had my assistant pick it up." "You got me fined. Twice. And now I'm stuck waiting a month to explain it to the HOA while the violations pile up." He chuckled. "Don't worry, I'll talk to someone on the board," he said. "They'll waive it. Just let it slide." But nothing slid. The next day, a notice came in the mail. The HOA was threatening legal action for unpaid fines, almost $900 now, with processing fees. I decided to start gathering my own evidence. I printed photos of the truck, screenshots from my security cameras, and a copy of the message the mayor sent when he asked to park it. I made sure everything was dated, every violation, every fine, every message. But as I started digging, I discovered something else. The HOA board president, a man named Ron Ellis. He wasn't just a neighbor, he was also one of the mayor's biggest political donors. They went golfing together. There were photos of them shaking hands at events. I even found a post from the mayor's campaign page, thanking Ron for his incredible support. Now things were starting to make sense. They were covering for each other. The mayor used my driveway, the HOA punished me instead of him, and now they were hoping I'd just pay and walk away quietly. But I didn't plan on going quietly. I started talking to other neighbors, something I never did before. I knocked on doors, asked about their experiences, and slowly the stories started pouring in. One lady said her American flag was too large, and she was fined $300. Another family got cited for unapproved window shades. A single mom down. The street got written up because her son's basketball hoop wasn't stored properly, even though it was folded and leaning by the garage. It was a pattern. The HOA wasn't protecting the neighborhood. They were policing it, selectively. But then came the biggest discovery. One neighbor, an older man named Dennis, told me the mayor had parked his truck in his driveway too, a few months back, for 3 days. No fine, no notice. I was stunned. He said, they even waved at him. Nobody said a word. That was the final piece I needed. They weren't just ignoring the rules for the mayor. They were actively using the rules to punish whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted. It wasn't about neighborhood standards. It was about power. I decided to record a video. Just me on my porch, calmly telling the whole story. The truck, the fines, the mayor, the connections. I showed photos, documents, names. I kept it respectful but honest. I posted it online. Then I waited. Within 2 days, it had over 80,000 views. People were outraged, not just from my neighborhood, but from all over the country. Comments poured in. This is why HOAs are dangerous. They're bullies with clipboards. I had the same experience in Texas. They fined my wife for a dusty mailbox. Then a local news station called. They wanted to interview me. I agreed. They came over, set up a camera in my living room, and I told the story again, this time on record. They aired the segment that evening, and the fallout was fast. First, the mayor's office released a vague statement, something about miscommunication and how the situation was unfortunate. Then the HOA sent a notice to all residents. They were reviewing internal policies and would evaluate all fines issued in the past 90 days. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted them to acknowledge what they'd done, and I wanted my name cleared. The next HOA meeting came a week later than expected. This time, over 40 residents showed up. Most had never attended before. They were angry, vocal, and I was ready. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the front with a folder full of documents and a small speaker. I played the mayor's voice message. I showed the photo of his truck in my driveway. Then I passed around the fine notices. And finally, I showed the security footage, time-stamped and dated. No one on the board said a word for nearly a minute. Then Ron Ellis, the president, leaned into the mic. I think this matter has gotten out of hand. A man from the back stood up. You're out of hand, he said. You're playing favorites, and we're done letting you. Applause broke out. The meeting turned chaotic. People demanded transparency, demanded change, and demanded resignations. That night, something incredible happened. 3 board members stepped down, voluntarily. The next morning, I received an official notice in my mailbox. All fines had been removed. My record was cleared, but more importantly, a new election was scheduled. The neighborhood wanted real representation, fair leadership, and that wasn't the end. The mayor? He stayed quiet for weeks. But his silence only made things worse. Soon after, more stories came out. Not just about trucks, but favors, connections, and abuses of power. One by one, they started surfacing. And it all started because he parked his truck in the wrong driveway and picked the wrong neighbor to ignore. The day after the mayor's office confirmed everything, I got a formal letter from the mayor himself. It was short but powerful. He thanked me for my honesty, apologized for the inconvenience, and mentioned he'd be taking a personal interest in my HOA's behavior from now on. That same day, the HOA president showed up at my door, not with an apology, but with a cold, forced smile. He handed me a new letter. This time, it was an apology from the HOA board, but it didn't feel sincere. They claimed the fine was issued due to a clerical mistake, that the enforcement team didn't recognize the vehicle, and that their intent was never to harass residents. I knew better. This wasn't about mistakes. It was about control, image, and unchecked power. But I had no interest in fighting them with more letters. I had another idea. Later that week, the mayor's office scheduled a community meeting at our HOA clubhouse. And to everyone's surprise, he showed up in person. Cameras were rolling. Local news outlets were present. Residents poured in, whispering and wondering what this was all about. The mayor took the stage and, with calm authority, told the entire community about what had happened. He spoke about transparency, fairness, and how associations like HOAs must work with residents, not against them. He didn't mention my name directly, but the story was clear to everyone in the room. The HOA president sat stiffly in the front row, sweat visible on his forehead. The rest of the board looked down, embarrassed. Residents, on the other hand, clapped and nodded throughout the speech. When it ended, the mayor announced that the city council would be reviewing all complaints made against HOAs in the city, including ours, and that's when everything started to shift. Over the next month, more residents began to speak up. A woman, who had been fined for planting sunflowers in her garden, came forward. Another family who had been threatened with fines over the color of their mailbox finally shared their experience. Turns out, I wasn't the only one they had bullied. It just took one loud enough story to open the floodgates. I was approached by neighbors I'd never really talked to before. They thanked me. They apologized for not speaking up sooner. Some even wanted to start a petition to remove the current board and replace them with people who actually lived in the community, not just served their own interests. And I supported it. In the meantime, something strange happened. My own property started getting more frequent inspections. Minor infractions were noted, like a garden hose slightly out of place or trash cans not being pulled in fast enough. It was obvious they were trying to find any reason to push back, but I kept everything spotless. I even installed cameras facing the street. They weren't going to catch me off guard again. Then, a week later, I came home to a fresh citation on my door. This time it was for unauthorized political signage. Except, I hadn't put up any signs. Curious, I reviewed my security footage. That's when I saw a board member sneak up at night and tape a political flyer to my fence. They were trying to frame me. I downloaded the footage, sent it to the city's code enforcement office, and copied the mayor's office. Within 24 hours, the HOA board member was under investigation. It was the last straw. The board held a rushed emergency meeting, but the damage was already done. A special vote was called by the residents. With overwhelming support, the president and 2 other board members were removed. They didn't even show up to defend themselves. They quietly resigned. The new board was made up of real neighbors, people who lived here, raised their families here, and actually cared about making the neighborhood better, not just stricter. One of the first changes they made was implementing a new rule. Before any fines were issued, homeowners would receive a written warning with a grace period, and any complaints had to be documented with photos and timestamps, not just anonymous accusations. Peace returned to the neighborhood. As for the mayor's truck, well, I finally got to return it. The mayor invited me to City Hall and shook my hand in front of the staff. He thanked me again and even joked that if I ever wanted to run for the HOA board myself, he'd endorse me. I laughed it off. But the truth is, I was thinking about it. What started as a simple fine turned into something bigger. It showed me that power, even in small places like neighborhood boards, must be kept in check. It reminded me that when people speak up, even against something that seems small, it can create real change. It made me realize how important it is to stay alert, informed, and involved. And it all began with a truck I didn't even own. Now, whenever I walk through the neighborhood, I feel different. Not because people recognize me or nod with appreciation, but because it finally feels like a community again. The lawns are still neat, the houses still proud, but the fear? That's gone. I didn't ask for this battle, but I'm glad I faced it. Because no one should be silenced or punished over appearances, especially when those enforcing the rules aren't following them themselves. Sometimes the smallest fight uncovers the biggest truths, and sometimes the mayor's truck ends up being the vehicle that drives change.